Hi guys, I'm doing a demonstration today on an upgraded AMMCO brake lathe that's been tricked out. I've been working on these brake lathes for over a decade now and servicing them in shops all across the Southern California area. Everybody wants the machines to work better and faster. AMMCO is still the best machine out there. Its performance has been proven over time. So all of my upgrades are directed at the most popular, best machine out there, the AMMCO brake lathe. This machine that's been upgraded is an old style machine. It's a cast steel machine. It's very stable. And with our upgrades, which is basically the power feed conversion and the guide bar upgrade, I make the guide bar slide through the case of the machine and is bolted securely to the cross feed, making the cutter head and the cross feed assembly much more stable, which helps it cut bigger rotors. This rotor here that I'm doing all the testing on is a big 14-inch rotor that a lot of people have major headaches trying to cut this one. On most machines, you have to slow the machine way down to its slowest belt speed, which makes for a very long time to cut the rotor. The cast steel machine is so much more stable that I can change pulley speeds and spin at a much faster rate. A faster cut is a cleaner cut. And I can run faster feed rates with the higher spindle RPM. So I played around with this machine a bunch, tinkering with it to like soup it up and make it as fast as it could go with the quality of the machine. Since it's a cast steel machine, it really didn't mind going faster and faster. I'm cutting on this one, I'm cutting at a speed almost equivalent to the high speed like you would use on a regular AMMCO. For a small rotor, I'm cutting a big rotor at that pace. Because the spindle RPM is so high, and I'm still getting a chatter-free cut, the whole thing ends up being basically a little bit better than twice as fast. The big difference is the stability of the machine. The steel machines are that much more stable and you have a lot more leeway on it. The traditional machine, the one in the right hand side picture, is just a standard AMMCO 4100 that has had the guide bar attached to the crossfeed carriage. That's why it's not having any problem handling this rotor. This particular rotor is very problematic. If you want to cut these big rotors, you need very stable tooling that's going to hold the rotor securely and not want to start chattering. I've done a whole series of videos on cutting bigger rotors and proper mounting. I use two different setups for mounting this rotor on the two different machines, but the basics are still the same. Both of these cuts are done with really correctly appropriate tooling, and I'm doing 3 passes because on a lot of rotors that you see where their brake pads touch the rotor, rotors are getting pretty expensive. You might have to make 3 passes on a damaged rotor that the brake pad's scraped on. So I'm taking huge cuts on both of these machines, as we should. We're trying to remove material cleanly as fast as we can because time is money. Now, the big difference time-wise in this video is we're looking at a steel machine that's been all the way hopped up. It's been pimped out as best as it could. I switched the pulleys on it 3 or 4 times until I found ones that cut as fast as possible and still gave me consistently clean, beautiful looking rotors. When I make the first pass on both rotors, you could see that the one on the right I actually started removing material first, and the one on the left caught up and passed on the first pass. It was already ahead, and by the time it got done with the first pass on the machine on the right, I was already most of the way done with the second, because I can cut in both directions. Now, I wouldn't recommend that if you're the guy that answers the phone, but if you're in a big old hurry, it'd be nice to be able to cut on the way in too. You can save a bunch of time there, and time is money. Now, you will notice that on these, we're using the round tool bits, which they are faster. You can make much faster, cleaner cuts at higher feed rates using the round tool bits. They're a big time saver. But I'm using the round tool bits on both machines, but on the upgraded machine, because the increased stability, the better spindle RPM, and the better control of feed rates, I'm able to get much more out of this contraption. Now, every machine has its own personality. The old cast steel machines were about as stable as you're going to get. The aluminum machines, well, I know why they sold them, because, you know, it's cheaper to ship an aluminum machine that weighs half as much. But in the big boy world, what we really care about is not how much it costs to ship it, but how fast does the machine work. Now, there's a whole bunch of old drum-only machines out there in the world that are sitting idle in the back of people's shops where nobody ever uses them, because, you know, there's not that many drums to be done anything with. Rather than letting that thing collect dust, those old drum-only steel machines are the prime candidate to go through the process of upgrading. It's cheaper than buying a new machine, and there is nothing that's going to outperform that old steel machine. Now, they usually need a new motor because it's an underpowered half horsepower or 3/4 horsepower motor, and if you're going to be cutting 14-inch rotors, you kind of need a 1 horsepower motor in it. So you got to do, there's a lot of stuff that goes involved into fully upgrading one of these machines. You got to have all your ducks in a row, but if you do the upgrade thing properly, with good belts, and use the high quality parts, and do everything nice, and do everything right, boy, you just can't beat how beautiful they perform, and the speed is just astonishing, the speed that I can get these things to cut at. Whereas with the cast aluminum machines, I'm never going to be able to get them to spin like this machine on the left. That machine on the left is more than twice as fast for basically the same quality job on both. The finish cuts on that rotor were pretty much identical. The only difference was on the upgraded machine, it took half the time, less than half the time. And in the extra time that was left over, I could do all kinds of stuff. You could, I don't know, finish the brake job on the car, or make a chip catcher, or clean your shop, or scratch your butt, whatever. It's your time. Don't waste it on a machine that's running super slow. There's some machines out there that are so unbelievably slow, I can't stand even tuning them up and servicing them. The old single-speed AccuTurn machine, even with a nice rotor that's in good condition, you're still going to be at it for like 20 minutes to cut one rotor. If you have to make 3 passes on an old FMC machine for 2 rotors, you're going to be there the better part of an hour. Okay, that's just too expensive time-wise. Whereas with one of these upgraded machines, everybody who's purchased the upgrade basically comes back with the same feedback, and that is 2 rotors, I don't care, we'll be done in 15 minutes or less for 2 rotors. Unless the rotor's really bad, then we'll be done with both of them in like 20-25 minutes tops. I see people using older FMC machines, and what's that other one? There's a single speed AccuTurn, old FMC machines. There's a couple other oddball machines that just take forever to get finished rotors off of. They're just slow as hell. We don't have time to waste like that. If you'd like to make money on your labor, which is really what we're in business for, you need your machines to be productive. Which brings me to some of the other stuff I wanted to mention. Through my whole career, I heard sales parts people telling us how much better it is to replace the rotors rather than machine them. Okay, this is something that all the parts people who make their money off of you selling rotors, this is their line of BS that they've been telling everybody all this time. When I started, all the mechanics knew straight out why you wanted the brake lathe in your shop. You had to have one because some of the rotors and drums show up damaged when you got them from the parts guy, because they sent them in the back of a truck that somebody drove like an idiot, and that drum got beat to death in the back of the truck, and it arrived a damaged drum that needed to be machined before you could ever put it on a car. In the Volkswagen world, we had the wide 5 lug bolt pattern, and if you were doing brakes on an old VW Bug with that wide 5 bolt pattern, you really should machine the drum with the wheel attached, because when you tighten the lug nuts, it twisted the drum, but each of the lug bolts where it went into the drum, it deformed the drum because the lug bolt was right next to the drum's braking area. So nobody would put the lug bolts that close to the brake drum area anymore for that very reason. That's why the bolt pattern is a lot closer to the center of the hub than out there by the drum area. It is what it is. So when you get new parts, the parts people assume that they're going to deliver parts that haven't been beat up. That's the assumption. The reality is they're beat up quite often. I see this in truck shops all the time, where they do these gigantic drums for trucks and trailers and stuff like that. If those things are sliding around the back of a pickup truck, they're dented before they ever got to your shop. And then you put this dented drum on the back of a trailer, and the trailer jumps all over the road every time you step on the brakes because the drums are damaged. I see this so often, it's ridiculous, especially with big auto parts stores that do a lot of drums and delivering with, you know, they got an army of kids driving around like nuts because they're fast. You know, that's why they like them young drivers, because they drive fast. Well, that doesn't do us any good if they're going to deliver us something that's beat up from floating around in the back of the truck. At least have them put a rubber mat in the back of the truck so the drums don't get beat up sliding around in the back of the truck. The other issue is availability. Now, here in America, we don't have the availability issues that they do in other parts of the world, but some parts of America, they do have issues with that. You can get brake shoes and brake pads for most anything pretty readily. Getting a drum that's in serviceable condition is another story entirely. If you live in farm country or rural America, there's not a parts store 5 minutes away. The parts store is an hour and a half away. Round trip, you could be looking at 3 hours to get a replacement drum. Then there's the availability of the parts. I run into this with people who do RV repair, and for them, getting a drum is almost always a fiasco because they've got the vehicle apart on a hoist or on a concrete pad, and you really can't have it sitting there for days while you wait for a drum, especially if you have a drum that you could have machined. Hoist time is very important, and that's one of the main reasons why these machines were sold to everybody. Was this machine is about saving you hoist time. You want to have your brake pads and parts ready when the car goes on the hoist. You don't want to lift a car up on the hoist and then wait for parts people to bring you your parts. With a brake lathe, when you go to do a brake job, if you start with the brake pads, most of the time the drums and rotors are savable. You can just machine them and do a high quality job. If you're not machining the drums, you can't compete on price or quality with somebody that does. If you're trying to compete on price by selling them new drums and rotors, the guy who's machining them is going to beat you to death on price. If you're trying to compete with on time, you might win every now and then on time if your parts people are prompt and everything, but I wouldn't want to stake my future and my profit margin on my parts people. I'd rather have that in my own control, which is what you have when you can machine most drums and rotors yourself. So that extra 10 minutes of time wasted, you could do a lot of stuff. If you're doing a simple, straightforward brake job on most cars, that 10 minutes of time that we saved using an upgraded machine, a competent, experienced tech, that 10 minutes is enough time to finish off the brake job before you could even finish cutting the rotors on the other machine. Now mind you, this was just with one rotor. If you were doing, I believe this is a transit van rotor, if you were doing a transit van, you're looking at almost 40 minutes to cut 2 rotors. Okay, that's the better part of an hour. Okay, if you cut both those rotors in 10 minutes, you could finish the whole brake job in under an hour without a problem. Easily, consistently, and you're not dependent on parts guys, which is, the amount of times that I've lost half days back in the Volkswagen days. It was not uncommon to lose a half a day to parts delivery of hoist time. Proper shop management, managing my time in the shop, because I ran a one-man shop with 2 hoists. I could get a lot more done if one of the hoists wasn't tied up waiting for parts. It wasn't such a problem because I had 2 hoists and just me as a mechanic, so the hoist time didn't really kill me as bad as if I had 2 guys and just 2 hoists. Then you can't have one guy sitting around scratching his butt and picking his nose while he's waiting for parts. We want to get the car on and off the hoist in a timely fashion. We want the job done right. We want the job done cost and time effectively in the shop. This is why we want to have a brake machine in the shop. We want one that's fast too. These machines that take 20 minutes or half an hour to cut a rotor, they're just eating up all your hoist time. Find one of them old drum-only machines, the old cast steel AMMCO machines, drum-only, and then spend some money and fix that thing up. It's going to outperform anything else that you could buy. I've seen the on-car machines. They're not all that nice. They're not all that fast, and it's very common with the on-car machines that they cut the first one correctly while they can see what the tooling is doing, and they take it around to the other side, flip the machine over. Now they're doing it upside down and backwards, and they screw up the second rotor. That's a very common problem. Besides the fact that the electronics packages on most of those on-car machines leaves a lot to be desired. The magnetic pickups pick up metal chips because you're cutting iron, you're making iron filings. Those iron filings get in the magnetic solenoid that does the centering thing, and next thing you know, your machine won't center and start up, so you can't even get the machine to work. Whereas with an old AMMCO machine in the hands of an experienced, competent tech, it's going to consistently do what it always did.